Hello, friends. What happens in the next few days could determine whether you receive hundreds, perhaps even thousands of dollars more in your monthly benefits, or whether you miss out entirely on what could be the most significant payment adjustment in over a decade. Right now, at this very moment, a massive shift is taking place in the federal benefits system. And if you're not prepared, if you don't know exactly what's happening on January 8th, you could be leaving money on the table that rightfully belongs to you. If you're new on this channel, please subscribe for our support. Tell me where you're watching this video from. What I'm about to share with you has been confirmed by multiple government sources, verified through official documentation, and affects millions of Americans who depend on Social Security, supplemental security income, and various federal benefit programs. The changes coming on January 8th are not minor adjustments. We're talking about a fundamental restructuring of how benefits are calculated, distributed, and adjusted. And here's the part that should make you sit up and pay attention. Most people have absolutely no idea this is happening. The mainstream media isn't covering this the way they should. The information is buried in government documents and official notices that most people will never read. But you're here right now, and that means you're ahead of the game. That means you have a chance to understand exactly what's coming and position yourself to receive every single penny you're entitled to. For some people, that difference will be welcome news, a pleasant surprise that puts extra money in their pocket at a time when every dollar counts. But for others, and this is the scary part, that difference could mean receiving less than they anticipated, or worse, finding out they missed a critical deadline that could have increased their payment substantially. The January 8th changes create winners and losers, and the only difference between those two groups is information. The people who know what's happening, who understand the system, who take action when action is needed, those are the people who will benefit. The people who remain in the dark, who assume everything will just work itself out, those are the people who will look back months from now and realize they made a costly mistake. Now, before I dive into the specifics, before I break down exactly who qualifies for what and how much money we're talking about, I need you to understand something crucial. The federal benefit system is incredibly complex. It's a web of regulations, exceptions, special circumstances, and qualifying conditions that can make your head spin. Over the years, I've dedicated myself to understanding the system inside and out because I've seen too many good people, hardworking Americans who paid into the system their entire lives, miss out on benefits they deserved simply because they didn't know how to navigate the bureaucracy. That ends today. What I'm about to share with you is the result of countless hours spent analyzing government documents, speaking with benefits experts, and breaking down complex policy changes into language that anyone can understand. The January 8th changes didn't happen in a vacuum. They're the result of legislation that was passed months ago, regulatory adjustments that have been in the works for years, and economic factors that have forced the government's hand when it comes to how benefits are administered. To truly understand what's happening, you need to know the background, the context that makes these changes not just necessary, but inevitable. For decades, the Social Security system and other federal benefit programs have operated under a relatively stable set of rules. Sure, there have been cost of living adjustments, minor tweaks here and there, but the fundamental structure remained largely unchanged. However, several factors have converged to create a situation where significant changes are not just possible, but required. First, there's the demographic reality. The baby boomer generation, one of the largest population groups in American history, has been retiring in massive numbers. This has put unprecedented strain on the Social Security system, with more people drawing benefits than ever before. At the same time, the ratio of workers paying into the system versus retirees drawing from it has been steadily declining. This isn't anyone's fault. It's simply a mathematical reality that was predicted decades ago and is now coming to fruition. When Social Security was first created, there were roughly 16 workers paying into the system for every one person drawing benefits. Today, that ratio is closer to 3 to 1, and it's projected to continue declining. This fundamental shift in the worker-to-beneficiary ratio has created enormous pressure on the system. and necessitated the kinds of changes we're seeing now. Second, there's the economic situation. Inflation over the past several years has eroded the purchasing power of benefit payments. What could buy a week's worth of groceries 5 years ago now barely covers a few days. The government has responded with cost of living adjustments, but those adjustments have historically lagged behind actual inflation, leaving many beneficiaries struggling to make ends meet. And it's not just general inflation we're talking about. The specific costs that hit retirees hardest, healthcare, prescription drugs, housing, utilities, have been rising even faster than overall inflation. A beneficiary who was comfortable 5 years ago might be struggling today, even with the COLA increases they've received, because those increases simply haven't kept pace with the reality of rising costs. Third, and this is something that doesn't get talked about enough, there have been errors and inefficiencies in the benefits system that have resulted in some people receiving incorrect payments for years. These errors cut both ways. Some people have been receiving less than they should, while others, through no fault of their own, have been receiving more than their entitled amount. The January 8th changes include mechanisms to correct these long-standing errors, which means some people will see increases while others might see adjustments that bring their payments in line with what they should have been receiving all along. These aren't new errors we're talking about. Some of these discrepancies have existed for decades, compounding year after year. The Social Security Administration has known about many of these issues, but lacked the resources and the legal framework to address them systematically. The January 8th implementation provides both. Now let's talk about what specifically changes on January 8th. The date itself is significant because it represents the implementation date for a series of regulatory changes that were finalized late last year. These changes affect multiple aspects of the benefit system, from how initial benefit amounts are calculated to how ongoing payments are adjusted, from who qualifies for certain supplemental benefits to how quickly payments are processed and distributed. Some of these changes are automatic, meaning they'll happen whether you do anything or not. Other changes require action on your part, forms that need to be filed, documentation that needs to be provided, deadlines that must be met. Let's start with the most immediate and widely applicable change, which affects cost of living adjustments. Every year, the Social Security Administration calculates a cost of living adjustment, or COLA, based on inflation data. This adjustment is designed to ensure that benefit payments keep pace with rising prices. For the current year, the COLA was calculated at a specific percentage, and under the old system, that adjustment would have been applied uniformly across all benefit payments starting in January. However, the January 8th changes introduce a new wrinkle to this process. Instead of a simple across-the-board percentage increase, the new system implements what's called a tiered adjustment formula. Here's how it works. Under the tiered system, beneficiaries are divided into different groups based on their total benefit amount and their income from other sources. Those who rely most heavily on Social Security, or SSI, meaning they have little to no other income, will receive a higher percentage increase than the standard COLA would have provided. This is a significant departure from past practice and represents an acknowledgement that those with the fewest resources need the most help in keeping up with inflation. On the flip side, beneficiaries who have substantial income from other sources such as pensions, investment income, or continued employment will see a smaller adjustment. The government's reasoning here is that these individuals have greater overall financial resources and therefore don't need as much help from the benefit system. Think about the logic here. If you're receiving $1,500 a month from Social Security, but you also have a $3,000 monthly pension and $2,000 in investment income, your total monthly income is $6,500. A smaller COLA on your Social Security benefit doesn't hurt you nearly as much as it would hurt someone whose $1,500 Social Security check is their only income. The tiered system tries to account for this reality. The exact thresholds and percentages are complex, but let me break them down in a way that makes sense. If your monthly Social Security benefit is your primary or sole source of income, meaning you have less than a certain amount coming in from other sources, you could see an increase that's anywhere from 1 to 3 percentage points higher than the standard COLA. That might not sound like much, but let's put it in real dollar terms. If you're receiving $1,500 per month in Social Security benefits, a standard 3% COLA would give you an extra $45 per month. But under the tiered system, if you qualify for the enhanced adjustment, you could receive an additional 5 or even 6% increase, which translates to $75 to $90 per month. Over the course of a year, that's the difference between an extra $540 and over $1,000. That's real money that could pay for medications, help with utility bills, or provide a cushion for unexpected expenses. For someone living on a fixed income where every dollar is already accounted for, an extra $500 or $1,000 a year can be life-changing. It's the difference between having to choose between food and medicine and being able to afford both. But here's where it gets tricky, and this is where you really need to pay attention. The tiered adjustment system doesn't happen automatically for everyone. While the Social Security Administration has income information on file for most beneficiaries, that information isn't always complete or current. If you have income sources that aren't automatically reported to Social Security, such as certain types of pension payments, rental income, or distributions from retirement accounts that don't generate the right tax forms, you may need to provide documentation to ensure you're placed in the correct tier. Failing to do so could result in you being assigned to a higher tier, which means a smaller increase than you're actually entitled to receive. The documentation requirements kick in on January 8th, and here's the critical part. There's a window for submitting this information. If you provide the necessary documentation within 30 days of the implementation date, your adjustment will be retroactive to January. If you miss that window but submit the information within 60 days, you'll receive the correct adjustment going forward, but you won't get the retroactive payment for the months you missed. If you wait longer than 60 days, you'll need to go through a formal appeals process, which can take months to resolve. During that time, you're receiving the lower payment amount, and there's no guarantee you'll ever recover the money you should have been getting. This is why timing is absolutely critical. This is why knowing about these changes right now, today, gives you a massive advantage. Let me give you a real-world example to illustrate how significant this can be. Let's say you're a retiree receiving $1,800 per month in Social Security benefits. You also receive a small pension of $400 per month from a former employer. Under the tiered system, your total monthly income of $2,200 places you in the middle tier. However, let's say you also have some modest investment income, maybe $100 per month from a savings account or some dividend-paying stocks. If Social Security doesn't have complete information about your financial situation, they might place you in a higher tier, assuming you have more resources than you actually do. This could cost you several $100s per year in reduced adjustments. But if you provide the proper documentation showing your complete financial picture, you ensure you're in the right tier and receive every penny you're entitled to. The difference could be $30, $40, or even $50 per month. That might not sound like much, but multiply that over a year, over 5 years, over the rest of your retirement, and you're talking about thousands of dollars that could either be in your pocket or lost forever because you didn't submit paperwork on time. Now, the tiered cost of living adjustment is just the first piece of the January 8th changes. The second major component involves what's called benefit recalculation for long-term recipients. This is something that affects people who have been receiving Social Security benefits for more than 10 years, and it's based on an acknowledgement that the current system has some built-in inequities that have accumulated over time. When you first start receiving Social Security benefits, your payment amount is calculated based on your earnings history, the age at which you claim benefits, and various other factors. That initial calculation is generally very accurate. However, once you're on the rolls and receiving benefits, subsequent adjustments are primarily limited to annual COLA increases. Over time, the formula used to calculate initial benefits for new retirees has been updated to reflect changes in average wages, life expectancy, and other economic factors. This means that someone who retired 10 or 15 years ago and someone who retires today, even if they had identical work histories and earnings, could end up with significantly different benefit amounts simply because of when they retired. This has created what policy experts call a cohort inequity, where retirees from certain years have lower benefits than they would have received if they had retired just a few years earlier or later. The January 8th changes include a provision for recalculating benefits for certain long-term recipients to address this inequity. If you've been receiving benefits for more than 10 years and you fall within certain age ranges, your benefit amount will be run through an updated calculation formula. This doesn't mean everyone will see an increase, but many people will. The recalculation takes into account the changes in the benefit formula over the years and adjusts your payment to something closer to what you would have received if you had retired more recently. For some people, particularly those who retired during years when the formula was less generous, this could result in a substantial increase. The government has estimated that approximately 30% of long-term beneficiaries could see some increase from this recalculation, with the average increase being somewhere in the range of $50 to $150 per month. Again, we're talking about real money here, money that adds up over time. A $100 monthly increase is $1,500 per year every year for the rest of your life. For someone who might live another 20 or 25 years, that's $24,000 to $30,000 in additional benefits. That's not pocket change. That's significant money that could fundamentally improve someone's quality of life in retirement. But once again, there's a catch. The recalculation process is partially automated, but it requires verification of your work history and earnings record. Social Security has most of this information on file, but there are gaps, especially for people who worked in certain industries, had periods of self-employment, or worked for employers who may no longer exist. If your record is incomplete, the recalculation might not capture your full earnings history, which means you could receive less of an increase than you're entitled to, or possibly no increase at all. This is where you need to be proactive. Starting on January 8th, you can request a complete copy of your earnings record from Social Security. This is a detailed document that shows every year you worked and how much you earned, at least according to Social Security's records. I cannot stress enough how important it is to review this document carefully. Look for any years where the earnings seem too low or where there's no earnings reported at all for years when you know you were working. These gaps and errors are more common than you might think, and they can have a significant impact on your benefits. I've personally known people who discovered that entire years of earnings were missing from their Social Security record. Maybe an employer went out of business and their records were lost. Maybe there was a data entry error decades ago that was never corrected. Maybe you changed your name after getting married, and earnings under your maiden name weren't properly linked to your current record. Whatever the reason, these missing earnings can cost you real money in benefits. And the January 8th recalculation provides an opportunity to fix these problems, but only if you identify them and provide documentation. If you find errors, you need to gather documentation to prove what your actual earnings were. This might include old tax returns, W-2 forms, pay stubs, or even letters from former employers. It can be a hassle to track down this documentation, especially for years that are decades in the past, but the potential financial payoff makes it absolutely worth the effort. Think about it this way. Spending a few hours digging through old files or making some phone calls to track down documentation could result in an extra $1,000, $2,000, or even more per year in benefits. That's a better return on your time than almost anything else you could be doing. Now, let's shift gears and talk about supplemental security income, or SSI, because the January 8th changes also have major implications for SSI recipients. For those who might not be familiar, SSI is a needs-based program that provides financial assistance to elderly, blind, or disabled individuals who have limited income and resources. Unlike Social Security retirement or disability benefits, which are based on your work history and what you've paid into the system, SSI is essentially a safety net for those who have little to nothing. The program has very strict income and asset limits, and these limits have been a source of frustration for many people because they haven't been updated to reflect modern economic realities. Here's where the January 8th changes bring some genuinely good news. The income and asset limits for SSI are being substantially increased for the first time in decades. Under the old rules, an individual could have no more than $2,000 in countable assets to qualify for SSI. and a married couple couldn't have more than $3,000. These limits were set back in 1989 and hadn't been adjusted since, which meant they had become increasingly restrictive over time. Think about it. $2,000 in 1989 had far more purchasing power than $2,000 today. In real terms, the limits had effectively been cut by more than half due to inflation. If you adjusted that $2,000 limit for inflation from 1989 to today, it would be somewhere around $5,000 or $6,000 in current dollars. So beneficiaries were being held to a standard that had become much more restrictive than originally intended. The new limits, effective January 8th, increase the individual asset limit to $10,000 and the couple limit to $15,000. This is a huge change that will immediately make thousands of people eligible for SSI who weren't eligible before. If you previously had just slightly too much in assets to qualify, perhaps you had a small emergency fund or a modest retirement account, you may now be eligible. This is especially important for people who have been trying to maintain some financial security while also needing assistance. Under the old rules, you essentially had to impoverish yourself to qualify for SSI. If you tried to save money for emergencies, you'd lose your eligibility. This created perverse incentives where people were discouraged from saving or planning for their financial future. Moreover, the income limits are also being adjusted upward. The exact amounts vary depending on your state because some states supplement the federal SSI payment. But in general, you can now have more income from other sources and still qualify for at least partial SSI benefits. But wait, there's more. The January 8th changes also modify what counts as an asset for SSI purposes. Under the old rules, nearly everything you owned counted toward that $2,000 limit. Your car, your furniture, your personal belongings, all of it could potentially be counted. The new rules exclude far more items. One vehicle is now automatically excluded regardless of its value as long as it's used for transportation. Household goods and personal effects are generally excluded up to a much higher limit. Retirement accounts that you can't access without penalty are treated more favorably. Even some types of savings specifically earmarked for education or disability-related expenses are now excluded from the asset calculation. What this means in practical terms is that many people who previously thought they could never qualify for SSI because they had too much stuff are now potentially eligible. You can have a reliable car, you can have furniture and household items, you can even have some retirement savings and still qualify for SSI if your income is low enough. And this isn't just about new applications. The Social Security Administration is required to review existing cases to determine if people who were previously denied or who had their benefits terminated due to excess resources should now be reconsidered under the new limits. This review process begins on January 8th, but it's going to take months to work through the backlog of cases. If you were denied SSI in the past because of the asset limits, now is the time to reapply. Don't wait for Social Security to contact you because, frankly, they may not. The burden is on you to take action and assert your right to be reconsidered under the new rules. The Social Security Administration processes millions of cases. They're not going to proactively hunt down everyone who might now be eligible under the new rules. If you think you might qualify, you need to file an application. The worst that can happen is they say no. The best that can happen is you start receiving several $100s a month in additional income. Let me tell you about some specific scenarios where these SSI changes could make a real difference in people's lives. Consider a 72-year-old widow who worked part-time for most of her life and receives a very small Social Security benefit, maybe $500 per month. She has a paid-off car worth about $8,000, a small savings account with $3,000 that she's desperately trying to preserve for emergencies, and she lives in a modest home that she owns. Under the old rules, she wouldn't qualify for SSI because her savings account put her over the $2,000 asset limit, even though $500 per month is obviously not enough to live on. Under the new rules, she's well under the $10,000 limit, which means she could potentially qualify for an additional SSI payment that could bring her monthly income up to a more livable level. That SSI payment could be $400, $500, even $600 per month, depending on her state and exact circumstances. Combined with her $500 Social Security check, she'd be looking at $1,000 or more per month, which is still tight but far more manageable than trying to survive on $500. Or consider a 65-year-old man who became disabled in his 50s and receives Social Security disability insurance, but only a small amount because his work history was limited. He has a truck that he needs for medical appointments and errands, and that truck is worth about $15,000. Under the old SSI rules, that truck would have counted against his asset limit, and the value would have made him ineligible. Under the new rules, the truck is excluded, which means he might now qualify for supplemental income through SSI. These are real scenarios that affect real people, and the January 8th changes represent genuine opportunities for financial relief. But the message I need you to take away from all of this is simple. Information is power, and action is essential. These changes are happening whether you're ready or not. The question is whether you're going to position yourself to benefit from them, or whether you're going to let opportunities slip through your fingers because you didn't know they existed. Starting right now today, you need to take action. Request your earnings record from Social Security. Review it carefully for errors. Gather documentation of your income and assets. If you think you might qualify for SSI under the new rules, file an application. If you're a long-term beneficiary who might benefit from recalculation, make sure your records are complete. Don't wait. Don't procrastinate. Don't assume everything will just work itself out. The people who benefit from these changes will be the people who take action. Be one of those people. If you're new on this channel, please subscribe for our support, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether these changes affect you.